In fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A busy hour on Farage tonight. We'll talk about, as inflation is up, benefits going up, but wages not going up as much. Is it better for people on low pay to simply live on benefits? Dominic Raab today introducing a British Bill of Rights. Would it allow us to overturn ECHR decisions? I don't think so. Fumes, the engineer, joins me ahead of Glastonbury. We'll talk about drill music. Should we be worried about some of the lyrics? And on Talking Pints, Chris McGovern of the Campaign for Real Education. What is happening in our schools? But before all of that, let's get the news.
Good evening, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The RMT says tomorrow's rail strike will go ahead after talks finished today without an agreement. The unions accuse Transport Secretary Grant Shapps of wrecking negotiations. The RMT says it'll continue with industrial action until it reaches a settlement over job security and pay. Just 60% of trains are running today, despite there being no official strike, with some operators ending services earlier than usual, ahead of another strike tomorrow. Inflation has hit its highest level in 40 years, climbing to 9.1% in May, up from 9% in April. The rising cost of food and non-alcoholic goods were the main driver, further squeezing household budgets. Last week, the Bank of England warned inflation was likely to peak at more than 11% in October. The Labour leader has gone head-to-head with the Prime Minister as voters prepare to go to the polls for two crucial by-elections. Sir Keir Starmer has accused Boris Johnson of failing to prevent this week's national rail strikes by refusing to meet with unions and operators. But Mr Johnson says the Labour leader is in the pocket of the unions.
Strikes, as he knows, it is up to the railway companies to negotiate. That is their job. We know why he takes the line he does. We know why he won't condemn the strikes. We know why even now he hasn't got the gumption to call out his MPs who are going out to support the pickets, Mr. Speaker. The reason his authority is on the line in this matter is that they take £10 million from the unions, Mr. Speaker.
People are being urged to ensure their polio vaccines are up to date after the virus has been detected in sewage samples in London. The virus, which was officially eradicated in the UK in 2003, was discovered at a treatment works, which serves 4 million people in the north and east of the capital. The UK Health Security Agency is investigating the extent of transmission and has declared a national incident to check for cases as a precaution. The UN has said a lack of access could pose the biggest challenge to rescue operations in Afghanistan after an earthquake killed at least 1,000 people. The 6.1 magnitude quake struck the southeastern region early this morning. Local officials say more than 600 have been injured, and the number is expected to rise as emergency services reach more remote villages. The sale of Chelsea Football Club will see £2.35 billion go to a charity helping people affected by the war in Ukraine. The club has been sold after previous owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned as part of UK's efforts to target Russia. The Office of Financial Sanctions says the money is frozen in a UK bank account, having ensured it was not given to any sanctioned individual. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now, it's back to Nigel.
Good evening, everybody. Well, the official inflation figure was out this morning. It's the highest in 40 years. No great surprise there. It's running at 9.1%. But we also hear today that one of the government's big plans over the next year is to increase benefits and pensions in line with inflation, perhaps even double-digit rises. Now, when you think about it, those in work are being offered 2%, 3%, maybe 4%. So if you're in work, you are relatively falling behind. And one thing I'm struck by, and I'm going to start debating tonight, but really examine over the course of the next few months and weeks, is if you're a young couple with a couple of kids, perhaps an elderly parent living with you, if you can get in excess of £25,000 a year in benefits, and that's tax-free money, what on earth is the point of going out to work? We've heard many times before about the trap that you're on benefits, you want to go to work, but the tax system makes it very, very difficult. But I'm beginning to think that situation's about to get worse. And I say that because we keep hearing about labour shortages, and yet immigration figures are the highest they've ever been. There are 5.3 million adults of working age in this country not working. A very large number on disability benefits. Quite a large number who appear post-pandemic to just not want to go back to work. But perhaps there's no real incentive if you're on benefits to do so. So please, you tell me, are people better off on benefits than going out to work and being on low pay? Give me your thoughts. Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, Jonathan Porters joins me, Professor of Economics at King's College London. Do you see the point I'm making, Jonathan, that if benefits are as rumoured, and of course, this is a government facing an election at some point, but if benefits do go up in line with inflation, but wages are rising at a paltry 2 or 3%, there are millions of people out there who aren't much better off.
Well, wait a minute. Benefits were raised by 3%.
They were, yes.
In April. The minimum wage was raised by more than 6% in April. So that increased the differential between the level of benefits and the minimum wage. At the same time, wages overall have been going up by 4 or 5%. Wages for people in the finance sector have been going up by a lot more.
But I'm talking here about the lower paid.
Well, so the lower paid are not doing that badly in that sense. Minimum wages have gone up by more than benefits this year. What happened? We can come to what happens next year. This is next April we're talking about for benefits and pensions going up. But at the moment, wages are rising faster than benefits. People on benefits are falling further behind. So it seems very odd to suggest that any of the labour shortages we're experiencing now can possibly be to do with the benefits system.
I'm just talking about the message that's been put out by the government overnight. And I'm also kind of hinting that when you get a government that proposes that those that work pay taxes, for those that get housing benefit to get mortgages, I mean, people start to say, well, what's the point of working?
The employment rate just before the pandemic, the employment rate in this country was its highest level in recorded economic history, right? Most people in the UK who can work want to work. We do have a very long-standing people with a lot of people on disability benefits. That goes back to the Thatcher recession of the early 1980s and the Lawson major recession of the 90s, both of which pushed a lot of people out of work who drifted onto disability benefits in some respects. Are we seeing that again with the COVID pandemic? That the COVID pandemic forced people out of work, some of them have moved on to disability benefits, perhaps some of them got long COVID and are now disabled. That is definitely a worry, and that is something that the government should be worried about.
The figures that I've looked at suggest that there are 3 times the number of people on disability benefits today that there were in 1981.
That's correct, broadly.
It doesn't make sense, does it? Doesn't work. It's not possible, is it?
I think part of that is definitely the after impact of the recessions of the 80s and 90s, when we did government did let people.
Look, you can blame the Tories, Jonathan, all you like, all right? But what I'm saying is this.
Entirely the Tories. No.
Is it okay? Fine, but is it right that so many people are on disability benefit?
I certainly think that governments of all parties, and not just the Tories, haven't done nearly enough to help disabled people back into work. We're a lot better at recognising mental health conditions than we were 30 years ago, and that has quite a lot to do with it. A lot of people on disability benefits now have moderate mental health conditions of some form. And it is very difficult to get people in that condition back to work. What's the answer? We don't know. It is a mixture of help, support, pressure sometimes, getting the benefit system right. We do know that in the beginning of the 2010s, when the Tories came in, they said, oh, a lot of these people are scroungers, we're going to have new tests, that's going to get them back to work. That was a complete and utter failure. A lot of people's lives were made a lot more miserable. Some people died. We know people died of starvation, quite literally, in this country because their benefits were taken away.
Well, there are food banks and other ways to back people up, but
we know there are cases already. So you have to be quite careful about this. So I don't think that taking people's benefits away. We know that does not work. It's not politically viable.
So we have to incentivise work. And my point is that,
and I agree on that.
Some of those striking railway men and women who are on $32,000 a year, right? Let's say they've got a wife, a couple of young kids at home. They've got an elderly relative living with them. They're living in London. They'd be better off not working.
I don't think so. And,
well, there's not much in it.
Well, do you think that, I don't hear the striking railwaymen saying, oh, well, actually, we might as well go and live on benefits. They're saying we want our wages risen by something that's at least...
Jonathan, we're going to come back to this because I've got to explain to myself why there are 5.3 million people of working age that aren't working, and most of them are living on benefits of some kind. And it's a subject I'm going to return to again and again, and I shall call once again on your expertise. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, some of you may remember Benefit Street, that very popular TV show. And there was one shining star that came out of the programme of that street. Yes, it's Deirdre D. Kelly, White D, and she joins me now.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. Very good to see you. Now, you were very much the absolute star of that programme. And what I'm talking about here is worsening economic circumstances, the prospect of benefits going up next year quite a lot. Do you feel that there's a mindset out there among people who are on low pay that they might just as well be on benefits?
I wouldn't say there's a mindset out there, but there is a serious problem out there. And again, this kind of draws the line, doesn't it? It's kind of, the majority of people who are on benefits, we've just come through a global pandemic. There are more people on benefits now that have ever been on them. And people trying to get back into work. But again, it's kind of it's to do with everything that you've mentioned, the cost of living, the inflation rise. It's making it extremely difficult for people to survive, whether they're working or not.
Yeah, and Dee, just a thought on this, on the psychology of this. From what you've seen and with your experience, are people happier being at work than they are on benefits?
I don't think in this current climate, I wouldn't say they're happier at the moment because, again, people that are working 40 plus hours a week, and they've actually got nothing to show, Nigel. They can't live. Do you know what I'm saying? It's kind of obviously, the youth organisation that I co-run at the moment, we've been providing food parcels for needy families for over 2 years. And we've actually saw a massive increase in the demand for families who are actually in employment. And that seems to be the sad state of affairs at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say, people in work and still going to food banks, people in work who I suspect might be better off in some cases on benefits. Dee, it's fabulous to have you on the show. I'm going to get you back again, hopefully in the studio here, and we'll talk about this whole question in the not too distant future.
Definitely.
Thank you for joining me this evening. Thank you. Thank you. Now, the ECHR, this programme has, of course, been railing about the ECHR, and I was the least surprised person in the country when an anonymous judge at 10:05 the other day grounded that flight. But it's OK. Dominic Raab is coming to the rescue. Dominic Raab, the man who always looks to me rather like a rabbit, stuck in the headlights of a car and rather frightened of himself, but he was up today in the House of Commons introducing his British Bill of Rights. Let's have a look.
Mr. Speaker, next we will strengthen the separation of powers in this country, affirming the supremacy of the Supreme Court, being explicit that the UK courts are under no obligation to follow the Strasbourg case law and indeed are free to diverge from it. I'm proud of our world-beating judiciary. And what else is the point? What else is the point of a Supreme Court if it bows in subordination to a European one?
So it's all going to be fine, absolutely fine. There's no problem at all. No, you can believe every word. Dominic Raab tells you his new bill means we can just ignore judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. Well, got to tell you something. I spent 20 years across there in Strasbourg and Brussels, and what I know is our membership of these organisations is through an international treaty. We are honour bound. And if we think we can stay part of the ECHR, but just break the rules when it suits us, well, it's a very un-British approach to things, in my view. Why not just leave the blooming thing? That's my view. I'm totally unconvinced. Just as unconvinced as I was that Rwanda would work all the while we stayed part of this thing. And you can think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've been right thus far. Well, Jed Odermatt is lecturer in law at the University of London. Jed, these were very big claims today by Dominic Raab in the Commons, that somehow this was reclamation of our sovereignty in every way. How do you read it?
Now, of course, I would disagree with you on whether or not we should be leaving the ECHR, but I do agree with that assessment you have.
Why, of course? Would the whole of academia always disagree with me?
Well, I am in favour of us being part of the European Convention of Human Rights. Fine. I think that's maybe a debate we can have on another day. We're not talking about this bill.
Fine.
But I do agree with you on your assessment about the fact that this will not allow the UK government to be able to simply ignore decisions of the ECHR. What it means is that really judges will have less discretion in the way they interpret and apply the ECHR in the UK system. So even though there's a lot of debate and talk about how this will change the balance between Strasbourg and the UK, what it really means is really with narrowing what the judges in the UK can do when it comes to interpreting and applying the ECHR.
Article 8, this right to a family life, which perhaps is the one that's been the most contentious over the years. And I think what Raab is saying, that the bar must be set higher for what constitutes right to a family life, in terms of who your dependents are, etc.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that the bill intends to do. It tries to rebalance rights in this way. And there are a few types of rights that are emphasised by the government in the bill. And Article 8 is one of them. Also, freedom of speech is also given quite a bit of emphasis, and also the kinds of rights that the government doesn't like, for instance, so-called positive obligations. But definitely Article 8 is one of the areas that is trying to be examined in more detail. And I think the problem with this is really, well, as human rights lawyers, we try and apply human rights in a way that they're all kind of equal, rather than having
You're a whole industry, you guys, aren't you? You're a whole industry. Tony Blair's the best thing that ever happened to you.
There are things that could change for the ECHR system to make it better, but also for the implementation. But I don't think that this addresses any of those issues for the implementation. It wouldn't really improve the rights of victims to be able to make claims, successful claims in the British system. And there's also been criticism that the bill, as drafted, isn't very workable, that it's not drafted in a clear way that will actually be workable for judges who have to actually apply the bill if it becomes
So let's
law.
just say, I mean, this government still has a big majority. Let's just say they rattle this bill through Parliament. Does that mean then they'll be sending planes to Rwanda?
Given the same set of circumstances, after this becomes legislation, what this bill would mean is that, say, these interim measures, what you were talking about with Rwanda last week, wouldn't be applicable in the UK anymore, or for UK judges. And so this would mean that a UK judge could decide to not apply that interim measure, which, as you mentioned in your introduction, would lead to the situation where the UK would still be under an international obligation to implement that interim measure, but would be not doing it
through a treaty that we'd agreed to, and there'd be uproar.
Yeah. And the UK has, when it has presidency of the Council of Europe, sought to reform the ECHR to change that system. But what this bill would do is really minimise the discretion of UK judges when interpreting and applying. So I'm not sure if it would actually address what you see as a problem, which is what happened with the deportation to Rwanda.
Well, Jed and Matt, it's a pleasure to have you here in the studio, even though we are very much from different camps on this. But I think we both agree that Dominic Raab today in Parliament is trying to sell us a pup. It simply will not work now. It's Glastonbury this week. People are gathering down at Glastonbury. I'm going to be joined in a moment by Fumes, the engineer, because the Director of Public Prosecutions today's been talking about drill music. I'm going to ask Fumes, how bad is this stuff? Or shouldn't we be worried at all?
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show, a new report outlining the serious failings during the Rotherham child sex scandal has been released, but survivor Sammy Woodhouse will be asking why it fails to hold any individual accountable. As the floodgates appear to be opening for the vaccine injured and bereaved, Virginia Lamb will share her ordeal after she lost the ability to walk. Plus, we'll be taking the spin out of the news with our stats man Jamie Jenkins and editor of The Spectator Australia, Alex Marshall. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show tonight from 8 o'clock.
Welcome back. Well, I asked the question earlier, if you're on low pay, could you actually be better off simply being on benefits? Well, your responses to that, one viewer says, it is starting to feel like it's a waste of time going to work. May as well sign on and stay at home. John says, of course people should still work. It isn't for everyone else to pay for people's lives. Mary says, an absolute waste of time now. Inflation and benefit increases means it's pointless. And when you hear these negative comments about people going out to work, I think this is really bad for society. We're going to have to find a way for people on benefits to go to work and to actually be a fair bit better off. Now, it is Glastonbury this week, another one of those things that was all stopped for lockdown, but it's happening this week and the crowds are gathering today and it looks like it won't rain until at least Saturday, which is probably quite a good thing for the people heading there. Quite how they're going to get there with train strikes tomorrow, I've no idea, but I've got a guest with me tonight who's going to be there at Glastonbury as one of the star turns. It's Fumes the engineer. Before I introduce him, let's see him in action. Welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, man.
Are you excited about Glastonbury?
Yeah, it's a big day for me, man. It's my biggest booking, do you know what I mean? So it's big Glastonbury, Glastonfest, do you know what I mean? So yeah, very exciting stuff.
How are you going to get there? Not by train?
Nah, obviously, I think there's going to be maybe a couple cars, might have to be a bus. We're still kind of sorting it out because we're not sure what day we're actually going because we got a show the night before as well. So we don't know whether we're going to drive straight up there and then just stay throughout the day or just go up there. They said they wanted to get there like 5-6 hours early, so we'll figure it out, but we'll be there.
Now the music. I want to talk to you about the music.
Yeah.
Right? Drill music in particular, which has become very, very contentious, very popular, very controversial with some. And we've now got, the Director of Public Prosecutions in this country saying that the lyrics that are used in drill music shouldn't be used to smear defendants, but some of the video clips, if they show associations of different people, could be used in a courtroom. And it's kind of confusing, but let's just get into this with you. I mean, let's be honest. Some of the lyrics, some of the words in drill music are pretty horrific, aren't they?
It depends how you're looking at it. Like, some of the words in action movies are pretty horrific too, but it's not real life.
You say that, but I mean, I look at some of these lyrics about, the use of blades and knives, and we kind of know that in London and many of our cities, we've got increasing knife crime and all the rest of it. And I put Rambo blades in chests, Take That Risk by CB. It's not good, is it? I mean, does drill music need to clean itself up? It's really my question to you.
Drill music's like an expression of freedom of speech. Like, it's creativity. It's an opportunity for the younger generation to kind of make something of themselves. So when they're in the studio, when they're doing music videos and that, they're not doing whatever it is that other people will stereotype them for doing. Do you see what I'm saying? So it takes them away from potentially any kind of street activity, any kind of violence, X, Y, and Z, if that's what their life consumes of. But a lot of this is it's visual storytelling.
So you're saying it's not real life?
No.
So this stuff, and by the way, I know there's only a fraction of the words that are used are like this, and I get that. I'm not trying to put the whole genre in a bad light. I'm just saying, wouldn't it be better for drill music as a whole to get rid of some of this stuff?
What makes you say that, though?
Well, we're living in a society where what we say and whether we cause offence to each other has become a much more sensitive issue than it's ever been before. I'm going to talk later on about a comedian, tells a joke and gets reported to the police, and it wasn't that bad a joke, really. And I'm just saying to you that I think some of this language it's almost encouraging violence.
It's not, though. It's not always encouraging violence. Sometimes they're actually talking about making money and buying their mum a car and moving out of the areas.
I get
that.
So
we need to not focus on what it is that you guys want to focus on, because it's like drill is creative storytelling. and all they're doing is trying to use their talents to tell a story. It doesn't mean that they are the story. It doesn't mean that that's their everyday life. Do you see what I'm saying?
No,
Because
look, I get what you're saying. I understand a lot of it is about aspiration, a lot of it is about ambition, and I get all of that. As it turns out, it looks like the courts are going to agree with you, and the courts are going to say that these words can't be used in cases. I just wonder...
As they should.
I just wonder, don't you sometimes think that goes a bit far?
Sometimes I think GTA goes a bit far. I think action movies goes a bit far. We got Fast and Furious. People are driving around, they still get speeding tickets. It's offensive. It's offences. It's crimes as well. Do you get what I mean? But I'll be looking into that though. All
right, fine. Well, listen, have a great Glastonbury. Thanks for coming on. And I know some of you at home won't know much about drill music, and I'm not here to demonise it. I just think some of the words, perhaps sometimes, if they weren't there, it might be a little bit better. That's just my feeling on it. Thank you very much indeed, Fumes.
Anytime.
For joining me this evening. Right, let's go on to a subject that is a little bit grimmer, I think, than that, and it's Rotherham. Now, we remember, going back just a few years ago, I'm talking 2014, the Rotherham abuse scandal hit the front pages of our newspapers and caused the most incredible shock. The biggest shock, I think, wasn't just what was happening to those young girls, it was that the police appeared, quite willfully, to turn a blind eye. Well, here we are, all this time on, and there is a report that is out today, and I wonder whether all these years on, there's going to be some accountability for what happened, what went wrong, and that collective turning of a blind eye. Well, David Greenwood is a solicitor representing 80 of the Rotherham victims and survivors, and he joins me down the line now. Good evening, welcome to the programme. What does this IOC report tell us, please?
Well, it lays out bare all the failings of South Yorkshire Police during the period 1997 to 2013. 40-odd, most of my clients spoke to the IOPC and gave long video interviews detailing their contacts with the police during the time that they were in sexual exploitation, detailing, for instance, being sat in cars with groups of Asian men who were much older than them, and that the police didn't take any action on those types of things, and being found in premises and not being taken home or to a place of safety when they were in premises, along with a number of Asian men. So it lays all that bare. It lays bare the failings of the police to have any kind of professional curiosity about these offences also for such a long period of time. It lays bare the system that the South Yorkshire Police operated, which was to essentially discriminate against these girls and to not really take any kind of offences seriously. It shows how the systems at South Yorkshire Police were geared more towards acquisitive crimes, burglary and theft, rather than looking out for this, what is now really a segment of a generation of women in Rotherham who have been affected by this. So that's one thing that it does. It tells us the facts, but it also tells us that very, very few officers were able to be disciplined, and none of them lost their jobs. There has been zero accountability.
David, this is extraordinary, and I say that because when this Rotherham story first broke, I think a lot of people found it difficult to believe. And I've been asked about Rotherham, not just in this country, but in America, Australia, and all around the world. So shocked were people at the scale of what went on in a not particularly big town in Yorkshire. And just to get back to that point you made, not a single police officer has lost their job.
Absolutely. And what message does it send? It sends the message to women who could be thinking of coming forward and telling their tale that they won't get any accountability as far as the police are concerned. And it also sends the wrong message to police officers. It sends the message that you can do your job really badly and get away with it and keep your job.
Well, you know, David, I'm not a police basher, far from it. I try and be as supportive of the police in most cases as I possibly can. They've got a hell of a tough job to do. But in this case, it was one of abject cowardice for fear of being called racist and total failure. And final thought, perhaps, please, from you. Are we confident that these kind of activities are not taking place in Rotherham today?
Definitely not. No, they are taking place in Rotherham today, and they're taking place in towns and cities up and down the country. They're taking place in villages in our country. Well, the National Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse did a study of 12 local authorities and police forces and their responses in recent years to CSE, this type of street grooming, and they found good and bad, mainly bad practice, and some good. And, you know, for all the systems that are in place now, it really boils down to whether there is good leadership in the council and the police, whether they're really serious about pouring money and resources into these things. And the biggest thing for me is that the response times, when these offences are reported, response times are way too slow. Once they're reported, the girls are already in it. They need hit squads to get in there and do something about it quickly, not in 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months' time. We really need to focus on this.
No. I think there's overwhelming support for that point of view, and David Greer, but I want to say well done for what you do in standing up and fighting and representing the rights of 80 of those young girls that were abused in that most truly shocking and horrendous way. Thank you for joining me here on GB News. Now, I talked about free speech a moment ago with Fumes, and I made the point that these days almost anybody can get in trouble over free speech. Probably this is harder for comedians, for stand-up comedians, than it is for anybody else, and we hear examples of many of them effectively being cancelled, theatre bookings being stopped, and all the rest of it. But Joe Lycett is not one of those that we would expect. Joe Lycett, of course, Channel 4, BBC 2, a whole host of TV programmes that he's done over the years. Very, very well-known fella. Loves going out and doing his stand-up routine. Well, one of the jokes that he told caused offence to somebody in the audience. How awful. Can you imagine being offended by something someone said? You paid 35 quid to go and hear them, and they tell a joke, and you're offended. And so that member of the audience reported Joe Lycett to the police. And the police, who could, of course, been working on cases such as the Rotherham situation that we just discussed, no, they had to put time and effort into the joke that Joe Lycett had told. And in an Instagram post, Lycett wrote, "To be fair to them, the Fuzz were very nice about it, but they felt they had the duty to investigate." And of course, it was dropped. There are no charges. But what's happened? We've just wasted the police's time and money. And I have to say, I just think the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. The matter is now closed. But you know, if you're worried about a joke Joe Lycett might tell, don't buy a ticket. If you don't like the jokes that Joe Lycett tells, then don't go back and buy another ticket. Let's leave the police out of this. It is nonsensical. It is ridiculous. I do wonder whether much of what's going wrong is really being bred through our schools and universities. I don't think we're teaching youngsters genuine critical thinking, that there are different points of view and they have equal virtue and merit. No, we're sort of, I think, indoctrinating kids to think one way, and to think anyone that thinks differently is somehow causing you an offence, that you need your safe space. I think education is perhaps the part of our country that needs more reform than absolutely anything else. Well, in a moment, on Talking Pints, Chris McGovern of the Campaign for Real Education will join me, and we'll discuss that very subject.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's time for Talking Pints. We're here at the GB News Tavern by Thames, and I'm joined by Chris McGovern of the Campaign for Real Education.
Cheers.
Good evening. Now, there are some that would say the Campaign for Real Education, it all sounds a bit backward. What's wrong with you? Shouldn't we be more progressive in our attitudes and our thinking?
Yeah, some snappy thinkers say, oh, well, the Campaign for Real Education is a bit like the Campaign for Real Ale, but more fun, you know.
I like the Campaign for Real Ale.
Well, you're like the Campaign for Real Education, because we came into existence in Yorkshire about 40 years ago, basically to save grammar schools and also to save the grammar school exam. And we need the Campaign for Real Education more than ever, because we're the only voice at the moment saying, look, actually, we've lost something. And yeah, you know, sometimes people say to me, Chris McGovern, you're living in a past age.
Yeah.
But when I go to Singapore or Shanghai or South Korea, they say I'm at the cutting edge. Because the methods I'm suggesting, which we ditched in the 1960s, well, they're not being ditched in Singapore. And interestingly enough, the old grammar school exam, the O-level, is still the exam they sit in Singapore, and we ban it in our own country. We make it here.
It was 11 plus to begin with, wasn't it?
That's
right. To get in. And the argument against, which I remember very well, is it's unfair at 11 to separate kids.
That was the argument. I actually failed the 11 plus, went to secondary modern school, passed at 13, so you could pass later on. And by the way, it's nowhere near as unfair as the current system, where you buy a house in the catchment area of a good school. So now we have selection by postcode. It's not a perfect system, and other countries around the world have grammar schools, and they have a selection system of sorts, but they do it without actually taking an exam, because they have very good technical schools. They have vocational schools. Problem in our country.
Vocational? What does that word mean?
Yeah, indeed. What does it mean? The problem in this country was so snobbish.
We've got a lack of engineers. Yeah. We've got a lack of people in the medical profession. A lack of people. I mean, the STEM subjects. We have to import labour from all over the world. What is it about us that says to 16-year-olds, says to 18-year-olds, you know, we'd love you to get an ology, but for goodness sake, don't become an engineer. For goodness sake, don't go and learn a trade or a skill. Because the funny thing is, all the people in trades and skills right now and through the pandemic are earning much more money than those working in the so-called profession. Is it some sort of snobbery about this country?
A lot of snobbery, I think, Nigel. What's happening is that traditionally in this country, we've regarded academic as being superior. Somehow Dickens is superior to Charles Kingdom, to Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Engineering, plumbing, roofing.
All a bit grubby.
But of course earning a lot of money. And what we're doing at the moment, thanks to Tony Blair, we're sending large numbers of youngsters to university, 50% now.
Yeah.
And they're underemployed. When I spoke to a national conference of admissions tutors at university a few years ago, I told them the truth. I said, you understand that half of your youngsters are now working in jobs which they're graduates, but they're not doing jobs commensurate with that degree. They're underemployed. And there was a hushed silence in the room, and it was witnessed by the press. After that talk, 3 universities admissions tutors came to me, and they said, Chris, thank God you said it, because no one else will tell the truth. And that's what's going on. Kids are going to university, doing useless degrees, and they're underemployed afterwards. We need to get youngsters into vocational schools from an earlier age. I mean, we have grammar schools, and they're doing a great job. Not many of them, about 200 or so, across Britain and Northern Ireland.
Which is nothing.
Nothing, no. We need lots more grammar schools, particularly in poorer areas, but we need horses for courses. We've got to get away from the idea that somehow grammar schools are better. No, we want good technical. Switzerland, Germany, China, Korea, they have these schools.
And in Germany, of course, if your 16 or 18-year-old says they want to go and learn a trade or learn a skill, you're overjoyed. So, there's something wrong with our thinking on this. You were a headmaster.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about universities on GB News, particularly about the banning of speakers, the safe spaces, the incident at Durham University that happened with Rod Little. And we do debate that a lot here on GB News because we believe in free speech as a channel, genuinely. It's part of our DNA. I worry that actually a form of indoctrination of kids is taking place way before that it's actually happening from primary school onwards. You see, I was brought up, I was well educated, didn't mean I didn't do anything like as well as I should have done, but I was brought up with critical thinking.
Yeah.
I was brought up with, look, here's a particular issue or a problem. There are 2 very clearly defined approaches to it. They both have equal moral value and virtue, and you make your mind up which of those you believe in. And I feel now from an early age we're teaching kids that this alternative is upstanding, is moral, is correct, is unchallengeable, and those that believe in the other view, are virtually neo-Nazis.
That's true. I mean, even from primary school, 5-year-olds are being taught about gender identity, for example, and asked to question this. Children who deserve a childhood, who can see evil through fairy tales, for example, with them when I get familiar with the nastiness of the world. But from an early age, 5 or 6, they're being taught critical race theory, gender identity theory, and they're getting confused and they're becoming quite unhappy. Because what we do know from a number of investigations is that youngsters in British schools are some of the unhappiest in the world. I mean, a lot of mental health problems. They are being brainwashed. We're entering a new dark age of education. The lights are being switched off in our education system. And if you want to know what our governments have done, not just the present government, last 50, 60 years, what's their monument? Look around you. Look at the state of education today. That's what they have achieved. And it's a mess, and we're running about 3 years behind in standards, the best education systems in the world. It's a disaster.
Surely, Chris McGovern, you must be wrong, because every August we get the GCSE week and the A-level week, and grades are getting better every year.
Yeah, it's incredible. We close the schools down, and the grades go through the roof. And the government's chief, the government's chief standards commissioner at what's called Ofqual said a few years ago to the Sunday Times, and I quote, "All our kids are brilliant." And that's the lie we're living. So the results get better and better and better, but the standards fall. And I've taught young children and older children for 35 years. Yes, young people want good results, but they want something more than good results. They want the truth. They'd rather know the truth. Where are they? And the fact is, they're a long way behind. There was a TV program a few years ago where cameras went to South Korea. They gave the South Korean 15-year-olds a maths GCSE. They did it in 20 minutes, and they said, well, we did that in primary school. Yeah. That's how far behind we are. Yeah. About 3 years.
An American billionaire friend of mine lives in Singapore now, and he said he couldn't do his 16-year-old's homework. It was way beyond him. I get the point. But there is no point sitting here over a pint, railing about what's wrong with education, and we could have gone on for hours talking about the problems. What I'm interested in life always is, how do you fix things?
Yeah, of course.
How do we begin a culture that turns this around, Chris?
Incredibly difficult, but we've got to start with, how do we teach the children? There was a Times report, Commission report a few days ago, 96 pages, asking the question, how can we fix our education? 96 pages. Well, I can tell you in 2 words, good teaching. And therefore we need good teachers and we need people who are trained. So we've got to focus on the training of teachers. But it's an immense problem because the education establishment, the blob, consider it's all a big success. They're self-congratulating. They think they're doing really well. So you've got to get into the teacher training colleges. You've got to get into the Department for Education. Dominic Cummings, love him or loathe him, he said when he worked in the Department for Education, it was like going into a lunatic asylum. I've been in there many times. I've worked with many secretaries of state and prime ministers. And believe me, it's got progressively worse, not progressively better. And we've got to do something about it. We have to start with teacher training. But how would you make North Korea into a capitalist society tomorrow? It's equivalent.
Gosh, that is a bit depressing. So what you're really saying is we need leadership, political leadership. We need this. Well, we need these ideas presented to the public to vote for them, political leadership, but then we really are turning around a tanker. And it's going to take us many years to get back on the right track. It's going to be a long, hard slog. I mean, we need to improve the calibre of our secretaries of state. I've worked with many. The good one, I think, the only good one I can say was Blunkett. I thought was a good chap, and he ended up going to an NUT conference, a union conference, and they had to lock him in a broom cupboard for his own protection. That's what you're up against. So our current Secretary of State needs to wake up, and first of all, he needs to admit there's a problem. And there's a problem in government which says they don't do that. There is a problem. We are falling behind. Once you recognise the problem, you can do something about it. But it's the training of the teachers. But if they believe in the educational blob that they're doing a great job, then there is a huge cultural problem. 7% of our young men and women go to private schools. Private school fees have gone up way above the rate of inflation for many, many years. It's a crippling cost for anybody that's not, frankly, very, very well off indeed. How much bigger advantage do those kids have who go to that 7%? Well, I ended up as a head teacher in a private school, but taught much of my career in large comprehensive. They get an advantage because they have good teaching and they have much more in terms of extracurricular activity. But don't fool yourself, Nigel. According to the OECD, the international number crunchers, the children of the street cleaners in Shanghai are ahead, in general, of the best kids in our best schools, the brightest kids, because they are taught well. So there's no excuse for saying because they go to a posh school, they're going to do better. No, because if the youngsters in places like Vietnam, Shanghai, Vietnam's a good example, do so well, then our kids can do so well. It's about how you teach the children, and don't turn your back on what we did in the past, because we're the only generation, we're the only country in the developed world where grandparents outperform their grandchildren. So maybe in the 50s and 60s they got something right. And we've moved away from some good tried and tested techniques. So we've got to look back as well as looking forward. We need both. When you talk about this education in Korea, and I mentioned Singapore, you mentioned Vietnam, China, I guess to some extent this explains, doesn't it, why there is this transfer of wealth and power from west to east that is going on right across the world. Is there anybody out there in current UK politics that is talking this language? Anybody in a leadership position? We have Nadeem Zahawi, of course, in post at the moment, thought by some to be a potential successor to Boris Johnson. How's he doing? Well, he'll be controlled by his civil servants, as they always are. So I mean, we had a half-decent chairman of a Common Select Committee, Halfan. He's not bad. Yes. But it's a very low bar. He's jumping over there. Look, you have to persuade people at the top. Margaret Thatcher, who I work with quite closely at times, and number 10 in those days, a very different sort of place then, she was aware of the problem. But she had lots of things to do, fighting wars in Argentina, the miners' strike and everything else, so she never got round to dealing with the problem. But look, we do need leadership. Is Zahawi going to be the man? Everybody else has failed. Will Zahawi succeed? It's unlikely. But he's got a challenge. And he's got to, first of all, wake up to the problem. And he's got to talk to people like the Campaign for Real Education, because they only listen to the people who created the problem. They talk to the people who created the problem, bring them back and say, now, can you solve the problem? No, the people who made the problem, caused the problem, aren't going to solve it for you. My goodness me, you really believe in this, don't you? I do, absolutely do. And I've taught for many years, and you talk to the children I've taught, they will say, Chris McGovern, he's not a traditionalist, really. He just believes in high standards, and they like that. Chris McGovern, thank you for joining me on Talking Pints. Cheers. Wow, that was real passion. That was somebody who really believes in what they're doing. I like to see that, I really do. It's time for Barrage the Farage. Let's go. Laura asks, how would you have handled the train strikes with regards to the unions? My own feeling, Laura, is they say it's not the role of government. It's not for us to intervene. Well, they just spent 16 billion quid of our money during the pandemic, effectively bailing out the railways. I'd love to have seen Boris Johnson call the bluff of Lynch, the union leader. Invite him into Downing Street. The union man would probably refuse. That would give the government, actually, some moral superiority. They haven't done it. Bob Crow, the late Bob Crow, who I may not have agreed with everything, but rather liked as a person, told me once that in all the years he ran the RMT and Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, they never had a single meeting. And I think in life, actually, you can show yourself to be the bigger man or woman by inviting somebody in, even if you have a disagreement with them. That is my feeling. Yvonne asks, do you agree that Boris is obviously a Remainer? Now, I don't agree Boris is a Remainer, but I do think most people in this cabinet use Brexit as a political opportunity, not as something they genuinely believed in. And that might have been good in December 19 for the election, but we're now seeing they're not fully delivering. Right, Alex asks, steak and kidney pie or leek and potato? Which one would you go for?
I'll go steak and kidney pie.
I'm going steak and kidney all the way, all day, every day, no question. John asks, what would you do next to counter the EU and opposition to Rwanda flights? Please, folks, don't believe a word that Dominic Raab said in the House of Commons today. None of it will come true. It's all political posturing. The Bill of Rights will not give us superiority over the ECHR in Strasbourg, which is not what it was set up to be by Churchill and others 75 years ago. If we leave the ECHR, we get back control of our borders. Now, I thought we voted for that 6 years ago tomorrow. I'm done for the day, but I'm going to hand over to, of course, Mark Stein.
Yes, steak and kidney for me too, Nigel, so that's three of us. I had no idea you were a Fumes the Engineer fan. I'm so out of it, I thought drill music was the British Grenadiers. On tonight's Mark Stein Show, another day, another town, another, quote, damning report on the state's indifference to the serial rapists preying on young girls up and down the kingdom. Are you ready for the next pandemic? And is polio stalking the sewers of London? Plus, just for a change, we have some actual good news, all coming up after the weather.
Good evening. The weather is on the change. Still plenty of very warm, hazy sunshine for many tomorrow, but an increasing chance of seeing some thunderstorms. The Met Office have issued a yellow warning for the downpours coming up from France from this weather system. There's another weather front at the other end of the UK, bringing a bit of patchy drizzle across parts of northern Scotland overnight. But for most of us, we're still under the influence of high pressure. It brought plenty of blue sky through the day and a fine, balmy evening out there. But notice to the south just the risk of these thunderstorms drifting further north, certainly the threat across the Channel Isles. There's that other weather front bringing some drizzly rain to the Northern Isles. But most of us, it's a dry night. It's a pretty warm one. Temperatures holding up in the mid-teens, certainly in many urban areas. On to the details for Thursday. Again, like today, quite cloudy at times over western Scotland, Northern Ireland, certainly the far north, continuing with a bit of patchy rain, although that should peter out. It's further south where we're keeping our eyes peeled on thunderstorms developing. They're going to be developing more widely by the afternoon across England, eastern parts of Wales as well. The heat persisting over northern England and the North Midlands could get close to 30 Celsius. Not as hot in the south, but still pretty humid, pretty sticky, and that warm, humid air combining with some moisture, triggering those thunderstorms, hence why we have that warning in place. They're going to be hit and miss. Not everywhere seeing the thunderstorms, but where they do occur could cause some disruption. Even during the night, we'll continue the risk of further thundery showers coming up from the south. Another pretty warm and humid, oppressive night as we head into Friday morning. And Friday, a greater risk of seeing more cloud across England and Wales with more showers, and certainly bands of showery rain coming in from the west that will eventually introduce cooler air across the UK as well. Temperatures certainly not as high on Friday afternoon, but we could still get maybe 24, 25 across the east with some sunshine. Temperatures elsewhere in the high teens, low 20s, turning cooler right across the UK by the weekend.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight with me, Patrick Christie. She's had a glittering career that spanned decades, but what does broadcasting legend Angela Rippon think about the now troubled BBC? She's here to give her unmissable insights on Auntie's bias, the licence fee, and much, much more. Plus, Spiked Online's Brendan O'Neill and columnist extraordinaire Rod Liddle give their unfiltered opinions on the biggest news stories of the day. Don't miss that. And I'll break down the headlines of the day as well. My superstar panel, we've got political commentator Suzanne Evans, entrepreneur and activist Adam Brooks,